Hello, we're the history hikers and we are in
Lastours?
Lastours. There are 4, 5, maybe 6 castles behind us and we're gonna check them all out. Pretty famous Cathar castles. Anything else you want to add?
Well, the site there has been inhabited since the Bronze Age. In the 6th century it was known as the castrum of Caput Arietes, and from the 11th century there was writings about the castle of Cabaret.
Yeah. Caput Arietes, it's a Cabardes region, is here as well, so that's where it's come from. Anything else we'll add over in the end or say as we like, and nothing else right now. Let's check it out.
The town of Lastours is located in the Aude department in southern France. The name Lastours is derived from the Occitan Lastours, meaning the towers. The castles are perched on a rocky spur high above the town, surrounded by the rivers Orbeil and Grésillou. Along a rocky cliff, some 300 meters high and 50 meters wide, stand Cabaret, Regine and Surdespin, while Quertinheux rises on a pinnacle nearby. Differing in style and shape and following the contours of the rocks, together they form a formidable fortress. Also located on the hillsides are the remains of a castral village and the traces of a 5th castle, which is the original location of the castle Cabaret.
The Cabardes, the area around Lastours, was already inhabited around 1500 BC. The area was known for its silver, copper, lead and iron, already being exploited by Gauls and Romans. The area was conquered by the Visigoths and made up the northern border of their empire. It would next be conquered by the Arabs and subsequently by the Franks under Charles Martel and his son Pepin the Short. In 871, the Cabardes region was granted in fief to Oliba I, Count of Carcassonne. 200 years later, in 1083, there is first mention in the sources of a Lord of Cabaret.
This is the Trou de la Cité. According to legend, it houses a passageway that would have led all the way to Carcassonne. This theory is rather far-fetched, however, and misses any substantial evidence. The cave is also known as the Hall of Salimonde, or the Hall of the Witch. Legend would have it that the cave was inhabited by a young woman named Salimonde. According to the version you hear, she either had a goat's body and hair down to her hoofs, or she was dressed in sheepskin. If you heard her crying at Candlemas near the river Grésillou, then the winter was going to be cold, and when you could hear her whistle, the summer was approaching.
Wow, another stunning view.
During the Albigensian Crusade, the lords of Cabaret were vassals of the Viscount of Carcassonne. Despite many conflicts between vassal and overlord in the past, they joined forces against the crusading army. In fact, Pierre-Roger de Cabaret was present in Carcassonne during the siege of 1209, but was able to flee the city when it fell to the Crusaders. Under his leadership, Cabaret became the heart of the Occitan resistance versus the Crusaders from the north. Many Cathars fled to Cabaret and a large Cathar community was settled around the castle.
The original structure of the castle of Quertinheux was built in the 11th century, but it was greatly modified in the 13th century. The tower, for example, was built during the French period after the Crusade. The castle consists of a round tower with a polygonal curtain wall with pointed arches which support the allure or wall walk. The entrance is defended by a double wall. It also had 2 large cisterns to collect rainwater. In 1210, a most macabre procession arrived at the castle of Cabaret. It was a group of chained and exhausted people drenched in blood. Their noses and lips were cut off, and their eyes were gouged out, apart from one who was left with the one eye and had to lead the pack to Cabaret. These were the citizens of the nearby town of Bram, which had fallen to Simon de Montfort and his crusaders. They brought with him a warning that the same fate would await Pierre-Roger and his followers if they kept up their resistance.
Cabaret is the main castle of the fort and consists of 3 parts: a donjon, a rectangular residence, and a polygonal curtain wall to surround these 2. The north side is also defended by a square tower incorporated into the wall. The main entrance to the castle is again defended by extra defensive walls. You can also clearly see that the allure, or wall walk, is built on top of blind arches like at Quertinheux. These arches found in the wall of a building that have been infilled with solid construction. Cabaret wasn't just strategically important, but also a hotspot for troubadours, like Ramon de Miraval, whom we discussed in our video about Minerve. You can find a link to that video in the description or in the card in the top right.
Oh my lord!
Simon de Montfort would fail to take the castles on 2 separate occasions. This is not surprising when looking at the impressive fortress. The rocky spur held 3 castles at this time: Cabaret, Surdespin and Quertinheux. A third siege by the Crusaders in 1211 would prove too much for the defenders. Despite failing to take the castles via a direct assault, the crusading army was able to cut off supplies to the castle. Due to lack of food and water, Pierre Roger de Cabaret surrendered in 1211. Before the surrender, he was able to allow the Cathar community to escape the castle.
The surrender wouldn't be the end of resistance by the lords of Cabaret. In 1223, the new lord of Cabaret, Jourdain, was able to reclaim the castles. However, the tide soon turned against him when in 1226 the French king meddled in the crusade. Jourdain planned on submitting himself to the French king, but was captured by Raymond VII of Toulouse. Jourdain would die in Raymond's dungeons 2 years later. When Raymond eventually had to submit to the French king himself in 1229, his lands, including the Cabardès region and the castles of Lastours, would fall into royal hands. In 1240, a last desperate rebellion, including the then Lord of Cabaret, Olivier de Cabaret, broke out in southern France, but it was swiftly put down. Tour Regine was built in the 13th century when the castles were under French occupation. Its first mention is in 1243 as Touris Novae, meaning new tower. The castle consists of a round tower with a curtain wall. The construction is reminiscent of the tower at Quertinheux. At the top of the tower are 2 rows of halls to hold wooden hoardings.
This is the site of a 12th century castrum, located near the castle of Cabaret. It was abandoned after the crusade. The remains of many houses are to be found, as well as a forge and a stonemason's workshop. Here are also the ruined remains of the first castle of Cabaret, which was already destroyed before the Albigensian Crusade. Under French royal rule, the castles were fortified and the fourth castle, Tour Regine, was built. The surrounding villages were tasked with maintaining the castles and in return were exempt from paying taxes. When the border with Spain moved further south in 1659, at the Treaty of the Pyrenees, the castles would lose their strategic importance and fall into decay. The villagers still retained their tax exemption though, up until the French Revolution. In the 19th and 20th century, the castles were used as a stone quarry to build houses and the factory in the village of Lastours.
The castle of Surdespin is dominated by its square tower, which is separated from the residential building by a cistern. A trapezoid curtain wall provided added protection. There are a few large windows to be found and surprisingly little arrow slits, which is a sign of a more comfortable living space. the 5 or 6, if you include the castrum, castles of Lastours. I'm blown away.
Literally and figuratively.
Yeah, the
There's
wind
a
is very
strong wind.
This is so awesome. These 4 castles, we're gonna count them as one, but they're beautiful. It's beautiful being up here. It's time for the subjective, arbitrary castle score. I'm gonna go for 9.5. Yeah, it's right up there with the best of them.
I would even say I would go with a 10.
A 10?
Yes.
Yeah. It's hard to compare with Carcassonne, but
Yeah, but hear me out. If I were to give Carcassonne a 10, which I did, I would write that 10 in cursive, because Carcassonne is very neat. I give this one a 10, but I would write it either in a Carolingian minuscule, or I would cap it in, that's not how you say it. I would write it into stone, so it's very robust, and that's the feeling you get with this castle.
It's stunning. I'm gonna go for a 10 to as well. It's different from Carcassonne, but it's still amazing, and I think it's better than Montségur.
Yeah, just because there's 4 of them, every corner you look, you see at least one castle. It's always a castle in your view. The views on the mountain are amazing. There is this river around here. It's just stunning views.
Yeah, we're not gonna score each of them individually, but I'm gonna do it anyway. 7.
I'm not going to do it, but he's going to do it anyway.
7 for the Quertinheux. I'm gonna go for 7 as well for Surdespin. A 6 or 7 for Tour Regine, and an 8.5 for Cabaret.
Yeah, that was the nicest. Like the little tower, and then
Yeah,
going up, seeing all the views.
small staircase, but with the amazing view at the end.
And an amazing vaulted ceiling as well. That was pretty awesome.
This was us from Lastours, signing off.
Like, comment, subscribe, and all that good YouTube stuff.
Good YouTube stuff. At the bottom, I think. Bye!
From the Belvedere, which is located on an opposing hill, you have a stunning view of the 4 majestic castles. The entrance fee is included in your ticket to access the castles.